My name is Michael Silva. I'm president and CEO of ArchonOne. I run a managed IT services firm out of Midtown Manhattan. We're based out of 200 Park Avenue, and we service businesses between 40 to 500 people, and we handle everything IT related for them. What I came to talk to you guys today about is information security, cybersecurity, keeping yourself safe, and various new risks, and open the floor to any questions that you might have. So this is not really about me today, this is about you guys, so I'd like to hear questions that you have. I'll give you maybe a 3 to 5 minute background of security, what's current today, some threats that you should be aware of, tools that you can use to kind of help yourselves, and then I'd really like to hear from you based on that, what questions you have. As a little background, Georgina is my wife. She runs all of the accounting and the books for ArchonOne, and she's really good at it, so I'm very happy to see you guys involved with her. She's been very passionate about the organization. And I'm happy to be here today to talk about what I'm passionate about, which is computer networking, security, systems, anything information technology related. I'm also an adjunct professor over at New York Institute of Technology. I've been teaching for the last 7 years. I've probably taught upwards of, I don't know, maybe 1,500 students at this point over that time. I have my master's in information security and criminal justice, and my bachelor's degree in information technology. I've been incorporated for 8 years. I've been in the industry for 20 years, and I've been doing this as long as I can remember. The information that you guys have, that's a part of your life, things like your social security number, where you live, how many of you guys think that those details are relatively private? Let's say a scale of 7 out of 10, mostly private versus not. Okay. How many of you guys applied for a mortgage at one point? Okay. Now, when you applied for that mortgage, didn't you get a report back from TransUnion, Experian, Equifax, right? They gave you a credit report. Information came back to you guys that was about you, that was very personal to you, but it's something that you didn't necessarily provide out, right? So how many of you guys are familiar with the concept of identity theft? Okay, one very basic thing that you can do is to freeze your credit report, freeze your credit, period. Very recently, actually, in the last week or two, the government passed legislation where freezing your credit is of no charge at this point. So no one else can assume your identity from a financial standpoint easily without being able to pull credit on you. So one thing I would recommend to you guys right off the bat to keep yourself safe would be that. Okay. How many of you guys pay bills online? Okay. How many of you guys have received email from family or friends that appeared to be from somebody but wasn't actually from that person, like a fraudulent email? Okay, so several people, right? So, right, or a link, right, some type of spam, something that appears to be what it actually isn't, right? So anybody have any idea why this type of communication is sent, like why somebody would want to approach you to try to steal your identity or to get you to run malicious computer code? Anybody want to take a guess?
To get information.
To get information on you, right, which is useful, but there's usually an end game to that. I'll give you guys a hint. To get money, right, exactly. Right, so here's kind of where we go back to the origins of human beings. How many of you guys have locks on your homes? Okay, right. So I think it's safe to say that as a species, human beings are not inherently trustful of each other, right? We all trust each other, which is good, but not everybody trusts everybody else. Now, how many of you have more than one lock on your house? How many of you guys always use both locks? Okay, now I know there was some of you guys that didn't raise your hand to that second question. I won't pick on you for this, but there's probably a reason why you did not use that second lock, right? And it's usually because security and convenience are on two different ends of the same rope. So things that are usually more secure are typically less convenient, and vice versa. So what I'm getting at is when you put a lot of information online, right? When you interact with computer systems, when you send emails, when you receive emails to people, there is a certain amount of inherent risk. So how do you think that somebody could use that information that they collect about you to exploit that risk to make money? And I'll give you a hint. I already gave you part of the answer about 3 minutes ago. Okay, one easy way is to assume your identity, right? So I talked earlier about credit bureaus. If somebody has enough information on you, they can take out a loan in your name, right? So in a lot of different situations, someone may show up to, a car dealership, a personal loan, some type of banking institution, and they'll say, hey, I want to take out a loan, I am such and such, and maybe they're using your identity for that, right? And then they become you, which is kind of scary. So the question becomes, how do they prove that you are actually you, right? And this comes back to how much they know about you. So again, if you see emails in your mailbox, if you're being asked questions, if you're on the receiving end of phone calls, one very easy way to protect yourself is to cross-verify that information, right? So in other words, if somebody calls you and says to you, hey, I need to verify some banking information, it sounds legitimate. One easy thing you can do is you can say, what number can I contact you back at, right? And then you can actually look that number up. And if somebody says that they're calling from Chase or Bank of America or something like that, right, they give you a phone number, you can say, okay, fine, no problem. Listen, not a great time right now, I'll call you back. You take that phone number, you research it, and maybe it's on the front page of Bank of America's website. Maybe it was a legitimate phone call. But now you're making an outbound phone call to them, not the other way around. Now, I mentioned before that a lot of times people will use your information to take advantage and assume your identity. They'll try to get you to click on things, to install software on your machine. So there's some very basic ways you can protect yourselves. Proper antivirus software is very, very, very important. So most of the major software vendors do a pretty good job of protecting a computer, but you have to make sure that the definitions are up to date. Right? This is something that a lot of times everybody forgets. You assume that because you've installed antivirus software once, you leave, you go away, and then you're protected forever. Right? But that's kind of like, you know, getting a doctor's checkup and then forgetting about the doctor for 4 years. Okay, you did have some baseline at one point, and it's good, but you need regular checkups, you know, you need regular physical exercise, you need regular interaction with that protection to be able to make it effective. And the longer you go without that, the less effective it gets, right? So that's one very important thing. Another very important thing is when you see something that looks slightly suspicious, just ignore it or get rid of it. Right? This is kind of a common fallacy. Like a lot of times people will email me and they don't ask me a question and they get confused when I don't reply. Right? They'll make a statement. And then they contact me later and say, well, you know, Mr. Silva, why didn't you reply to me? I said, you didn't ask me a question. Right? So a lot of times you might get scary looking emails that are designed to provoke you into action. Right? Like, oh, your bank balance is this, you know, click here to confirm this. Or if there's no question there, and if you don't think there's a question, or if it even smells fishy, it probably is, right? Chances are really good, if there's something terrible financially that's going to happen to you, the person who you owe is going to find you, right? It's usually not going to be that once or that second. So using that in combination with actively reaching out and verifying that information will also help to keep you protected. Just to kind of go into the more advanced where we are today, there's a concept of something called advanced persistent threats, which are threats that try to take advantage of known exploits. So today, to hack into a computer system, you actually don't need to be a very well-educated hacker. Like, you really don't need to know a lot. You know, a lot of people have this vision of a computer hacker as being this, you know, young kid who knows everything, who can write a million lines of code, and you know, who can somehow infect a system remotely from their iPhone and cause all sorts of havoc. The reality is that a lot of people who break into computer systems, which by the way, hacking is not just a felony, it's multiple felonies, right? So big risk there that they take in general. But usually they're using pre-written code. As crazy as that sounds, right? It's like any other criminal trade, right? They're not actually creating all of the tools themselves from scratch. They're downloading and using exploit kits. And in a lot of cases, they're to participate in a larger network. So with enough computers infected around the world, somebody else could take advantage of that network and have the network of computers as slaves do their dirty work for them. So if there's data that they want to move, if there's things that they want to have happen, an objective, that they don't want to be caught doing themselves, they have a slave farm of thousands of other computers that have been infected to do it. And guess who gets the liability for that if that communication comes out of your system? Right? It can be you, right? Because your internet service provider may contact you and say, hey, listen, I'm noticing suspicious activity coming from your machine. And you go, what are you talking about? And they go, well, we definitely have proof. And they would be right. That's the scary thing. They would actually be right. They would be able to trace it back and say, it definitely was from your computer. And then you're on the defense right out of the gate. So it's better to have a stronger defense ongoing. Right, so proper firewall, make sure that if you're using an internet connection, you have the firewall on. A lot of your internet service providers will do this for you. A quick phone call to them, say, hey, listen, just want to check, can you verify that my network firewall is operational? They can tell you in 30 seconds. And trust me, we do this all the time for our clients. Right? We have proactive monitoring for it. But Bigger companies like Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, they're more in the business of delivering the communication. Security is a consideration for them, but you'll get their attention if you talk to them. Making sure, again, that your antivirus definitions are up to date. And then if you see something that looks kind of suspicious, it's kind of like that bag under the seat in the subway. If you get that email, you can just delete it. You can move on. You can move to the next subway car. You don't necessarily need to sit there and interact with it. There's nothing compelling you to do that. And then again, if phone calls come in, people if phone calls come in, people purporting to be someone who you don't think that they are, just tell them you want to call them back, right? You'll filter out probably 40, 50% of the fraudulent inbound calls. I can give you one password hint, which is kind of fun. So how many of you guys have passwords on your systems? All right, this makes me comfortable. All right, is everybody that did not raise their hand, do you not use a password or require anything that has a password? Everybody should have a password. All right. Now, the common discipline to passwords is like one uppercase character, a certain length, a special number in there, right? A special character, right? This is like a very common way to create a password that is incredibly hard to remember, right? And actually, even if you choose something that's 8 characters long, it sometimes can be twice as easy for a computer to guess that as something that's 16 characters long. But it might be more than twice as hard for you. So for example, when we make up passwords, we use a random password generator, and we include a special character and a number at the beginning or the end. So for example, like I look around the room, I might see painting, silver, and window. So my password might be painting, the number 4, silver window, #. Painting for silver window. Okay, you can remember that, right? Now, how many characters is that? If you count that out and you replace it with random letters and numbers, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, if you could remember that, then talk to me after this lecture because I have some jobs for you. But it's a lot easier to remember phrases. So think about your passwords in that way. One thing that you'll notice is that the password verification that's built into a lot of systems nowadays will actually only accept passwords that are up to a certain length. So to a certain extent, the industry is still catching up to this, that passwords that are shorter length, that are harder for you to remember, are not necessarily harder for computers to crack. So try to make your password as long as possible. Try to use a couple of different words in there. Try to use a rendition of a word, right? Like deliberately misspell a word so it doesn't match a dictionary entry. And you will come up with a more complex password. And if you ever have anybody shoulder surfing you, that's a geek speak for when they're staring over your shoulder while you're typing in a password, and your password keeps going and going and going and going, and they'll look at you and they'll start asking you for computer advice by the time you're done. Okay, so these are some very basic best practices. There's a lot to cover. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time presenting. I do want to ask you guys some questions. I did promise. Yeah, what questions, Mia?
I have one. We've been getting spam on our phones.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is I answer it and disconnect it right away. But I don't know why we're getting them.
Okay, so the question is, we've been getting spam a lot lately, and you don't know why you're getting them, and they keep coming in. Right. So let me ask you a question, and this will kind of bring out the truth in it. If you got spam that obviously looked like spam, then what would you do with it?
Well, that's why I answer it and disconnect it. It just says SPAM.
Right. So you would remove it, right? You would delete it. Okay. Now here's the question. If a system was able to identify spam like that, then if you could get the best quality spam filter in the world and identify everything as spam, then what do you think would actually reach your mailbox? Well, legitimate messages should, right? If spam actually made it through. You want to know what else would make it through? The world's best spam. Right? It's a computer algorithm. So what you're going to get is you're going to get legitimate messages, but you're also going to get spam messages that are so well crafted that they look exactly like a real message. This is the paradox of... You can't always fully eliminate. It's the paradox of spam, right? It's a cat and mouse game. You can think of it as someone constantly trying to break into your house. That's why I said advanced persistent threat, right? It's like something that continuously tries to find its way in. So sometimes these offline practices like making a phone call or waiting or checking with somebody else, sometimes you can even take some of the content of that email and search for it in Google or Yahoo or Bing or whatever your favorite search engine is and see if it matches, because sometimes other people online may have had the same experience. Might be a common spam message. But yes, absolutely. I mean, spam is very hard to prevent. There are ways that you can authenticate whether messages have come from a particular organization, or there are ways that you can, in companies' environments, make sure that messages that came from an outside source are flagged as coming from an outside source, so at least you know. But some of the most advanced cyber criminals build organizational charts of their targets. Right? So they don't go after the CFO. They go after the payables clerk. Right? And they'll go after the payables clerk with a message from the CFO saying, I need you to wire $43,281 to this person. I forgot. As you know, I'm leaving on vacation tomorrow, or it's Friday, I've got to go pick up my kids. Don't forget, I don't want to have another $1,000 penalty. Right? And that's what gets wired out. That's how it happens. Right? So I guess this brings another philosophical question, then I'll turn the floor back to you guys. Can anybody take a guess, based on what you know now, on a computer network, what the weakest part of the system is? The user. That's right. It's like any other type of security, right? If you had two adults who were fully trained with martial arts, a large dog, weapons somewhere in the house, locked doors, do you think all that would matter if everybody left and the front door was open? Probably not. I mean, unless you've got something else weird that you're not talking about. Probably not. So the best security in the world can be defeated by a negligent and determined enough owner. If you really don't pay attention, you really don't care, then you can't protect yourself. Right? So you have to have at least some level of vigilance. It doesn't have to be 1,000%. You don't have to outsmart or outfox every single other person, right? But you do need to at least recognize this. And I hate to say it, but the security of a system, just like the security of your house, has to be just good enough to go on to the next guy. It's a terrible thing to say, but that's the absolute truth, right? If you have somebody who's trying to steal, trying to burglarize, they're going to look for the easiest target they can, right? What looks easy? You know, if something's really hard, they're going to say, relatively, it's probably not worth it. I'll go on to the next one. Now, ideally, if everybody does that, it's not worth the criminal's time at all. That's where I'd like it to be. But unfortunately, we're not in a world without criminals. So this type of security will help you to protect yourself. Okay. Any other questions? What else comes to mind? Yeah.
Buying and selling stocks online, you think it's safe?
Buying and selling stocks online, is it safe? Well, I don't gamble my money, so philosophically, I would say no. But in all seriousness, interacting with paid systems, yeah, as an example, buying things online like stocks, generally, yes. Generally, yes. And I say this because you're depending on the security model of the website that you're interacting with. So for example, if you're on one of the major trading sites like E-Trade or any of the other big guys, when you log on to their site, on the top in the address bar, you're going to see HTTPS, right? And what that stands for is Hypertext Transfer Protocol with Security, or secure, however you want to phrase it. What this does is it takes a security certificate from the server and sends it to your computer and lets you know that you are talking to the right person. And then it sets up encryption. So a way you can think about this would be, imagine if every person that you talk to was required to provide some type of foolproof, solid, third-party issued identification that could not be forged, right? So that you take that identity and you know that you're now speaking with that person. Now imagine if they used part of that identity to create an entirely new language that you spoke in just for the purpose of that conversation. Right? That would mean that all of the traffic that you send in would be what's called encrypted. So that's what happens when you log on to any secure site. So the information that you send is what's called it's encryption in transit, right? Or data in transit. When it's secured with something like HTTPS, and you'll see this in Chrome, major web browsers on the top left, it'll say secure. But what you want to look for is HTTPS security. That means that the communication between yourself and the remote site is secured, and the data that gets transmitted back and forth is secure. Now, what it does not mean is that the data, once it gets there, is secure forever, right? That's data at rest on the server end may not remain secure. So if there's a bad actor within that company, or if that company has poor security practices internally and that data leaks, it doesn't matter if your data was encrypted going there and back or not. So you kind of need to be aware of both, right? You need to be aware of the fact that your connection to the remote site needs to be secured. But then once it's there, you have to make sure that you feel like you're working with a third party that you trust, right? If the person that you're sending your information to is going to use it for the sake of advertising, marketing, or they have bad security practices internally, maybe they get hacked, right?
And that can happen even if you're not online.
And that can happen even if you're not online. That's absolutely correct, right? Yeah.
I receive emails or read news of
Yeah,
like,
take me.
this is just a question for you, Michael. I have seen emails or news where companies, for example, like a company, like a credit card company, will have a data breach where they'll get hacked, and then all my information is given to another hacker because their system isn't secure. So that's kind of the same thing that you're mentioning too, right? Trusting that third party.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I guess the point is that when you send information out to a third party, that third party can get hacked.
So you shouldn't just sign up for anything.
So you shouldn't just sign up for anything. Right? Now, I mean, everybody eventually will experience some type of security breach, eventually, right? Even back as early as the 1940s, 1950s, right, the origin of the computer bug, right, was when actually a moth flew between some computer components. That's where they got the term from, and it did something unexpected. And then decades later, there was code invented to perpetuate itself through and replicate itself, which is called a worm. You know, viruses infect other machines and make them do things they're not supposed to do. And there's monetary gain behind all of this. You know, in the really, really early days of the internet, this was all about status, right? It was about, I am the world's best hacker, nobody can touch me, look at these muscles I can flex. Now people are in it a lot more for the money, which kind of sucks. I mean, it sucks that it happens anyway, but you know, it also sucks that there's money involved now. So you just have to be conscious. I mean, the short answer, like I said, is yes, it's probably safe to do that. I do all of my bill banking online for the most part. You know, some stuff we send in through the mail. But making sure that you have that secure connection out is very important. Yes, and also you should definitely freeze your credit, right? Because any information that is sent out, I know I keep saying this, but I'm a really big proponent of it. Any information that's sent out that's public can be used against you. It's a fact of life, right? So the question would be, how do they use that against you? And one of the easiest ways that someone can take advantage of the situation is by either getting a copy of your credit card information, which, by the way, does not mean that they're just going to sit there on a computer. There are devices you can use to actually put your card information onto a credit card itself and then make multiple physical copies of that card in different states and then run card in-person transactions all around the country all at once. It doesn't always have to be electronic. Right? So how many of you guys use chip authentication now? Right? When you show up to a grocery store and it says, please insert the chip, and it goes, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, yeah, that thing, right? As opposed to the swipe. You know that's more secure, right? The chip is more secure. Because the mag stripe can be replicated. Right? There was a big problem probably about 10 or 15 years ago. It's still a big problem today, but it was bigger before the insistence of the chips, where if you swiped a card, someone could insert what's called a skimmer and could actually copy the magnetic information off that card, and they could use a separate device to reprogram it and get an exact copy of your card. This is partially why credit card companies have an ID on the back that says, give me your verification code, because if you've just swiped, that verification code is not part of it. The chip actually, if you look over in Europe, is more popular with a PIN. So today, like I have seen, you know, guys from overseas, they come over here and they go, you crazy? You give your card to a waiter and they walk away with it? And you go, yeah, it happens all the time, right? In other countries that have slightly different security practices, they'll take your card, put it right in front of you, and then you have to enter your PIN. One of the most secure ways is at the table, someone will come to you, right, with a card reader. They'll say, insert your chip. So right away, they can't duplicate the chip, right? Because the way the chip is created is it's powered up by that device, and then a certain mathematical calculation is done on that chip to return a value. And that check can only be done if you actually have the physical chip present, right? It's different than the swipe. And then you have to verify against a particular PIN. So you can't actually get access to that line of credit unless you authenticate with the PIN while you're right there. Right? It seems more secure. But again, remember what I said about security and convenience? Right? Isn't it a lot more convenient to just ask for a bottle of grape wine, one more, and say, oh, you know, I'll have another drink. Go ahead. Give me some grappa. Take my card. You know, and the guy walks away with it. So there's always a little bit of a trade-off between security and convenience. But as long as you're aware of it, you can help to protect yourself against that. So also regular review of your financials, very important too.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, all right. Again, my name is Michael Silva. Pleasure to talk to you guys. Have a wonderful day.
And Bravehearts has a little gift for you.
Oh,
Thanks again for coming. And,
this is my wife, by the way. I wouldn't be here without her, so thank you for this. All right, thank you.